Hey guys, let's pick up from lecture presentation number 3A to continue with health services market. Moving on from the physician's market, we cannot neglect looking at hospital services, followed by the pharmaceutical industry and our amazing medical device companies. Recall in the prior lecture presentation, I used case management as an example used in the hospital setting to help control costs. And since physicians are the drivers of healthcare, we need hospitals to carry out their orders and provide the patient care. Mind you, this term kind of refers to any medical care setting, outpatient, inpatient, acute care versus long-term care. Regardless, physicians make these services possible. I recognize not everyone in this class is a nursing student, but the following quote fits really well here. Nursing historian John Linow once said, "Most people know they can't get into a hospital without a doctor. What they don't know is that they won't get out of one, at least not alive, without a nurse." Of course, the implication is that we need quality, safe, competent nursing care, but that care must resonate throughout the hospital if we want to see positive outcomes. Slide shows the different types of hospitals and how they are financially structured, for-profit versus not-for-profit. Now, one misconception I often hear that is worth clarifying is that when people say you want a not-for-profit or nonprofit organization because they don't have profit as their end goal or their focus, the pursuit of the almighty dollar. But that is not true. Every business must profit. That is to say, they must generate revenue above and hopefully beyond its financial obligations to remain viable. The term simply refers to how the money generated, profit gain, is allocated within the organization and how those residual earnings are governed, i.e., is there a board of directors? It is how their assets are transferred. Not-for-profit traditionally provides free care to the poor and indigent. Now, you may be thinking, wait, but you keep saying nothing is free. Well, you are correct. In this case, the hospital assumes the cost, so for the patient it is free because there are no out-of-pocket costs, but the funds are generated by charging others. The money has to come from somewhere. In turn, the hospital benefits from, say, tax exemption status and other government programs that kick in. This is particularly seen in our religious organizations, such as Catholic charity hospitals, Loma Linda University Adventist Health, and LDS Intermountain Healthcare. Over half, nearly 80% of hospitals are not-for-profit organizations. For-profit carried a negative connotation for years. However, they are on the rise. As too are private physician clinics that can bundle medical services, offering more options in-house and avoiding the hospital setting altogether. So back to what we were talking about. How did hospitals emerge and become what they are today? American hospitals were developed out of three primary reasons. One, we began to understand illness better from the germ theory. Germ theory was rooted in identifying disease-causing pathogens, which could be eliminated or at least minimized through good hygiene, plumbing, electricity, clean air and ventilation, and sanitation practices. Germ theory guides many of our holistic approaches to treating health and wellness today. Number two, our medical technologies were advancing. The X-ray machine was introduced in the late 1800s. And three, America was experiencing population shifts into the urban areas, creating more single-space housing, which eliminated the extended family living arrangement that existed to help care for one another. Today, our large hospitals still exist in the urban areas, such as our Level 1 trauma centers. In fact, as an institution, U.S. hospitals play a key role in the economy. In 2020, U.S. hospitals spent approximately $1 trillion, which comprises 1/3 of the national healthcare spending. and nearly 6% of GDP, gross domestic product. Recall the difference between GDP and GNP, gross national product. Competition sparks different types of hospital services, which makes it better for the patient. Factors that affect competition in the hospital industry include A, how many currently exist in the market, B, the nature of the product, i.e., is it unique, different, the same old, same old? 3, the ease to which to enter the market. In other words, are there multiple barriers, bureaucracy? And 4, it is based on the amount of information available to the healthcare consumer. Do they know you exist or want to exist? There are common community hospitals, physician group ownership, and teaching hospitals. Teaching hospitals are our university centers. An example near us is UW, University of Washington, here in the Northwest, and University of Utah, located in the Southwest. There are also research centers. These are also research centers, which is where we get our EBP, evidence-based practice. Research also contributes to economic growth. Hospital consolidation occurs where 2 or more hospitals merge. This allows for maximizing economies of scales, centralize administrative costs, and improve access to care. The latter is the most rewarding. Now, people have access to and more options within that access domain. An example in our areas include Providence St. Joseph. In fact, such an acquisition or merger creates a larger regional presence. We talked prior about the different reimbursement structures to pay for healthcare and thus hospital services. Cost shifting occurs to accommodate these different approaches and to structure their prices accordingly. I love this slide because it's so busy. And like most things, there is theory and then there is practice. Okay, now how do we work with both? In theory, we need A, but in reality, practice, sometimes we need like E. There is a disconnect. I intentionally made this slide busy to illustrate what budgeting looks like. It is a constant push and pull, give and take between monetary gain and loss. And you want to see how the law of supply and demand works? Well, here it is. Hospitals, of course, want to have beds and the ability to provide those much needed surgeries and other procedures, supply, to maximize utility. But they need the staff and ancillary services. Never overlook departments like central supply and housekeeping. The wave of supply side tends to be very cyclical and follows the direction of the economy. If times are good, so are jobs. And if times are rough, well, we know what that is like too. Nursing has always had waves of shortages and surplus, same with physicians. And we see these shifts in different areas of the country based on multiple economic and non-economic factors. Are there jobs that attract people to the area? Good schools, safety, like low crime rates. The presence of a hospital not only provides jobs, but much needed healthcare to its community. It's a win-win to have a hospital in your local township or city. Be familiar with these cost terms. For example, what is the difference between a liability and overhead? Think of overhead as employee salaries. One of the big pieces of a hospital's overhead. Nurses cost a lot. We are expensive overhead. Imagine all that overtime you work to make extra money, increase your take-home pay. Well, the money doesn't just appear out of thin air, nor does it automatically exist because a hospital is, quote, rich, with its CEO making $1.2 million a year. No, they have to make responsible decisions to ensure those funds are there. They have to create ways to allocate. Remember the term scarce resources. Despite a loss in payment, this is very real in today's market, along with more regulations and government oversight, the hospital has to still provide a competitive wage. Otherwise, they lose staff. It can be a vicious cycle, especially when insurance reimbursements are constantly being slashed. Remember, a small percentage, like 3% of hospital payments, come from out-of-pocket payments from the patient. Third-party insurers pay the majority of the hospital services. How do hospitals make up for the difference between real costs and received payment? This is a legitimate question because it occurs. In fact, when you hear that people lack access, remember this following statement. A hospital is legally required to accept patients who do not or cannot cover the full cost of their care. Let's say that again. A hospital is legally required to accept patients who do not or cannot cover the full cost of their care. Americans don't let people die, but the media routinely claim people lack access to care. What they ought to say is that people lack free care. Access and cost are two different things. So back to how do hospitals remain viable when costs exceed payment received? They must engage in cost shifting, that give and take. I can't stress enough the implications when a healthcare organization goes under. We lose hundreds to thousands of jobs, but ultimately the patients suffer because now they have nowhere to go for their health care. Hopefully you are starting to see why revenue and high profit margins are not only important, but necessary. Now that we looked at the hospital sector, let's take a look at the pharmaceutical industry. This is an area that you and I, all of us, have witnessed some fundamental changes just over the past year since the COVID outbreak. I provided a few important facts here. Take a minute to review these. I'd like to add a couple more, not on the slide. The U.S. is a rock star when it comes to R&D, research and development in pharmaceuticals. The U.S. produces nearly 75% of the world's total R&D spending and produce nearly 60% of all new drugs on the market. In 2020, there were 53 new molecular entities, NMEs, approved, which most were novel drugs, those drugs developed to meet a medical need or to provide an alternative approach to treating a disease. This is important too because NMEs are promising in the treatment of many of our chronic conditions, which are on the rise in this country, from cardiovascular disease to type 2 diabetes, to Alzheimer's, often referred to as type 3 diabetes, and obesity. It does not take someone to be in healthcare to observe the adverse effects of chronic diseases. Not just physically, but socially and mentally. It truly destroys one's quality of life, QOL. And although drugs may prolong one's life quantity, they may not necessarily improve the quality of their life. Now, this does not preclude life-saving drugs. I think I can safely ascertain that every one of us sitting at our computers right now has a story, whether it be about yourself or a loved one, who is alive and well because of a medication. It could be as simple as an antibiotic that cured strep throat, or a DMARD, disease-modifying anti-rheumatic drug, taken to improve symptoms from an autoimmune disease like psoriatic or rheumatoid arthritis. Or perhaps it is a mixture of chemotherapy agents that have worked to kick a cancer into remission. Beta blockers, oh, how those have revolutionized cardiac health, reducing death rates from MIs, heart attacks. I further contend that each of us are alive because we live right here in the United States. So looking at these statistics, it isn't any wonder why the U.S. pharmaceutical companies are rock stars and why they kind of deserve to make a rock star salary. These innovations benefit us on a global scale. The negative connotation of using terms like big pharma always existed to some degree, but now it seems kind of, well, a little reasonable. Not because they rely on research and development to profit from developing and marketing new drugs, but because they have become embedded with the federal government to the point that people question their integrity and sense of altruism. Are they truly selfless? Well, are you and I? Are we truly 100% selfless to pursue a career in healthcare? There are motivating factors too, besides wanting to help people. So, despite pursuing a profit and maybe even the incentive to get rich by finding the latest and greatest miracle drug, there exists that desire to improve and save lives. I realize this section may be perceived as a bit controversial, but it must be addressed. Moreover, the discussion should exist because this is an academic setting where the exchange of ideas should not be silenced and the veracity or the truth of data analyzed, maybe even questioned. But since COVID and the release of the emergency authorized mRNA vaccine from the three primary players, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, the American public was mandated to buy their product. This is one of the first times in modern history that health policy dictated public policy. FDA's original aim was to filter information to the public, to objectively look at the data, drug data, analyze it, then present a conclusion, not to identify the drug's risk. That was up to the scientists who developed it. Three primary issues exist with our pharmaceuticals in the States. 1. People do not pay directly for the medication. 2. The FDA has become a watchdog. Too much regulation power and now political power, which, by the way, increases costs. And 3. There is little follow-up once the drug has been approved, which means trial lawyers, again, not the scientists, have the say on drug withdrawals. Sadly, drug companies just assume pull a drug off the market than to deal with litigation. Here is another reason for tort reform. Patents exist to protect the time, effort, and financial investment put into the drug to bring it to market. The temporary protection of the scientific discovery is considered a public good. There are creative ways to get a return on their investment and how they price for different insurance rates and other factors. Medicare, for instance, will only cover certain drugs and reimburse on a set rate. During the COVID vaccine rollout, one way to ensure the big three pharmaceutical companies got their vaccines distributed and used was that Medicare covered only the vaccine for treatment of COVID, denying the use of established off-label drug use and/or other therapeutic agents. Once a drug patent runs out, this is when we see generic forms of the drug enter the market. Many of you probably already know this, but if you ever wonder which name is which on a medication label, the brand name is capitalized, while the generic name is lowercase. So for example, Glucophage brand name is capitalized, while its generic name, metformin, is in lowercase. Time to test your knowledge. The regulatory agency with oversight responsibility for the pharmaceutical industry is the blank. I'll give you a minute. The answer is C, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration. Good. This is a repeat from the first lecture presentation. We cannot lose sight of the value and beliefs rooted in the U.S. healthcare system. Now that we have had some time in this class, these values and cultural underpinnings should begin to make more sense and hopefully resonate. One way to highlight such values is in our medical device industry. And what better way than to show you? YouTube copyright laws used to prohibit us from pasting links directly into a slideshow. However, it appears since the lectures are published through YouTube, it is now permissible to embed a video. If you cannot open for some reason, just right-click to open in a new window. We'll go through each now. The first video shows repair of a cerebral aneurysm. The second video comes from Medtronic. This is remarkable. A leadless implanted pacemaker. The third video we come upon comes from Cook Medical, and it shows a duodenal stent. One could surmise we only place stents in the heart and brain. Here we go, the GI system too. I am in awe nearly every day with our new medical technologies and advancements. As a cardiac nurse, I marvel at how often we see some pacemaker or medicated arterial stent used by our cardiac physicians, and how the technologies have been so remarkable that they replace open surgical wounds, permitting a short stay while the patient receives their care through a simple puncture wound. We have Medtronic, a leader in cardiac care, Cook's Medical, a leader in GI and endoscopy care. Let's see who else? Well, there's St. Jude's, Boston Scientific. I'm sure you can name a few from your area of practice. All these competing device companies improve lives for all of us. Personal story. I received a stented pulmonary heart valve in 2012 that at the time had just been approved by the FDA. Funny little piece of trivia. The man who discovered it named the valve Melody because he liked to play the violin. What is the melody? It comes from a cow, a jugular vein valve. How in the heck does that work? Cow jugular veins are nice and juicy from spending so much time with their heads down to graze. R&D discovered this vein valve can sit in a stent to fit perfectly into the pulmonic position of a human heart. Take a moment to see each of these videos and then resume. We only have one slide left. Even as a seasoned nurse, I was in awe that such technology meant that I could go in and have a heart valve placed in the cath lab, no open heart surgery, stay overnight in the hospital just for observation, and then go home the next day with no pain and no restrictions. And the only medication here on out was a daily baby aspirin. Amazing. That's the kind of real life experience we get from such an innovative finding. Someone's idea and inquisitive mind changed cardiac medicine. And you and I are part of that amazing world. Be proud. This quote captures it well. He who has the technology wins. Be sure to view the Healthcare Outlook 2025 before you leave. See you on Canvas and have an amazing day.